At the closing session of the third Investigative Journalism Conference last week, the moderator Ed Lingao asked a simple question. Are journalists better off today, 2 years into the second Marcos presidency? Well, are they? Are we? Good evening. I'm John Nery and you are in the public square. Among the many activities prepared last week to mark World Press Freedom Day was a series of national conferences, first for community journalists, then on investigative journalism, then about media safety. That question from the veteran journalist Ed Lingao served as a common theme throughout the series. Is media under the second Marcos better off today? Joining us tonight to give us a sense of the state of journalism is news editor Jonathan de Santos, chair of the National Union of Journalists in the Philippines. Welcome back to the program, Jonathan, and thank you for joining us in the public square.
Good evening, John. Thank you for having me. I heard it was a very good conversation over the weekend on World Press Freedom Day.
Yeah, that's right. It was we had that ongoing conversation. Let me start by asking you. So we have a journalist like Frenchie May Cumpio who is still in jail on trumped-up charges. But on the other hand, the President of the Philippines no longer demonizes journalists. Can you help make sense of the state of journalism in the Philippines today?
That's probably the biggest improvement that we are seeing in this administration. That at least we're not being vilified, that at least we're not being cursed out on national TV. But looking at, for example, the policies and the tactics that were used against the media in the previous administration, they're still there. They are still being used in some areas. So are we better off? Siguro externally or from outside, it doesn't look that like we are doing better. But as with after 1986, I think press freedom has always been challenged, and really that's the idea that we have to keep pushing. We can't be complacent about basically a basic right for us.
As I've written before, I like media critic Jay Rosen's threefold distinction between journalism, media, and the press. No? Bear with me as I ask questions following this framework. So first, journalism as a set of practices. No? Has there been an improvement in terms of how we can practice journalism 2 years into the Marcos presidency compared to the 6 years under Duterte?
In terms of access, I think, well, at least the ban on Rappler, for example, is no longer in place. So there is that sort of access to sources. But I feel that we still can't, or we're still struggling to ask the important questions or the big questions. A lot of our reporting is still process reporting, it's still event reporting. It can be argued that at least we're still reporting, no? Pero there is still not a lot of space. So we don't have, for example, we still don't have a Freedom of Information bill. So we can't really access government information. It's still, in some places or in some agencies, you have to write an actual request letter for an interview. So these constraints are still there.
So in a way, we are back to the old normal, but the old normal was already a problem.
Right. If you when I started in journalism, for example, it was in 2008. Ganun yung process na you have to write a letter and then you have to wait for a long time. Basically, there was no sense that you have a right to the information, to government information. So I feel in a way that is still how we're operating. We have been pushing. There have been groups, for example, there have been groups who have been pushing for an FOI bill or for greater access to government information. But for the most part, we're still tied to what they're willing to give us.
In terms of the practice of journalism, it's not government alone or the state alone that may impose restrictions, right? That will set parameters. For instance, we have had the rise of bloggers and now vloggers, no? And I think that very early in the life of this second Marcos presidency, there was an attempt to accredit social media influencers, vloggers, bloggers, as members of the press corps. I don't know what's happened to that. And how is our practice of journalism faring today, given the activity of these bloggers and
Okay.
other social media influencers?
I think that proposal na to accredit bloggers, that was lost in the shuffle in Malacanang. But and I think we have adjusted a little bit to how vloggers, how influencers have been doing the news. There are examples of mainstream or dominant media attempts at getting into TikTok, for example, or using less professional, not less professional, but more inclusive language, I guess, to get more younger people to buy in. And the problem there, or the challenge there really, is how do we maintain the journalistic rigor that we're supposed to have while still being relatable, while still attracting a younger audience, or an audience that is that does not have as long an attention span, that does not have as much time as we used to.
The second part of the threefold framework is media, understood as referring to the business or the industry side. Are media businesses better off now, 2 years into the Marcos presidency, than during the 6 years under Duterte?
I can't speak for the financials of that,
Yes.
but I feel the attacks on hindi, beyond the feel, I know na the attacks during the Duterte administration have had that the effects of that are still being felt today. That a lot of newsrooms have to be, I guess, safer in the sense that you don't want to offend, that in the sense that you don't want to rock the boat too much, and that is a problem. But we do understand the context of it. Like, it's hard to risk your company, for example. It's hard to risk the jobs of hundreds of people. So it has been hard to, I guess, navigate that line between doing the job and steering clear of these problems.
Yeah, I agree with you that the consequences of, let's say, the shutdown of ABS-CBN, for which you now work, are still being felt. I think that we are still not in a position to know the exact impact, even though we know that the industry has been reeling from it, not the loss of jobs. So now you have ABS-CBN also working with other TV networks. No, we are still seeing it shake out, so to speak. But I'm not asking you here as a news editor for ABS-CBN, but as the chair of NUJP. There has been what is the word? A realignment of media entities, and I think especially now going into the midterm elections, we might see more upstarts, so to speak, in the landscape. But you also have big players from political families. One of the striking revelations from the series of conferences last week was that many politicians are now also going into media, having their own media arm. So we've seen this, like for instance, Speaker Romualdez, they're with the Standard, and they're working with the radio. One of his companies is working with DZMM and so on. But I think the revelation involved the activity of local politicians going into media where they are, right? How does this impact the state of journalism?
Okay. I don't think it's new that politicians or political families own their own media companies, especially in the provinces. A lot of the established newspapers are owned by political families, and that does pose a challenge. On one hand, it really is the political families who usually have the money and the infrastructure to put up these media companies, no? But it does also challenge yung idea of public interest journalism, for example. Like, how can you, if you're working in a newspaper in the province, how do you balance yung interests of your owner? How do you balance yung complexities of where you work, no? It's actually it's a problem naman even in Metro Manila, but for now, and this really does point to a need for siguro another funding model, maybe publicly funded, no? Sobrang dream yun, but but for now, what we can do is it is the reality that we're working in, and so it really is up to editorial boards. It's up to the news staff to uphold what we were taught to do and to do journalism. It's an extra challenge, of course, knowing that if you do a story that it might hit your boss, but yeah, it's part of the job, and part of that challenge really is how to do your story and to do it fairly. Without losing your job necessarily or without getting into that sort of trouble.
You are, of course, right that it's long-standing experience for political families to control local media. I think the part of the newness of the discussion last week was that more politicians are ready to do without the rest of the media. Now that they have their own, I mean, they can create their own YouTube channels. They can, of course, they've always done this. They print their own newspapers. They have own radio stations. But even now, they can do without the other local media because they can be present on social media. And I thought that was really worrying. So, is it? If the question is, are journalists better off now from the perspective of media as a business? Is the answer, well, it's more of the same?
It could be, but we're also competing. Again, we're competing for eyeballs. We're competing for attention with with the newer content creators. Let's say, So, I'm not sure we're better off in that sense. We do have to change how we do things a little bit. We do need to adapt to this new medium or this new way of presenting information or presenting facts. But the fact that groups or politicians can use social media to sort of circumvent mainstream media can also be good in the sense that as we were seeing in the US, for example, protest groups are broadcasting their sentiments, are broadcasting their campaigning basically on social media, and so there is a sense of that could be a force for democratization of access to information. But in practice, or as we're seeing, it's probably not the case.
What thrills me about what's going on in the United States, for instance, with all the student protests, is the responsible journalism coming out from campus journalists, right? So in the case of Columbia University, for instance, which has taken a turn for the fascist worst, you have the Columbia Spectator, for instance, giving us real journalism. They should have been awarded the Pulitzer Prize, not the New York Times. The mainstream media, I think they've been in the United States have been too ready to accept the establishment view, supporting pro-Israel position of the university administrations, for instance. So that in that sense, right? We hope that we can have more of these alternative news organizations, whether they be campus networks or newspapers or locally owned media organizations or news cooperatives, along the same lines as, let's say, Mindan News.
But yeah, we're also seeing, for example, Eastern Vista, the community organization that Frenchie May was with. It has been shut down since her arrest. No? So, yung potential for democratization offered by the platforms, for example, years later, medyo bumaliktad na siya. So that is a little worrying as well.
Yeah. I would think that part of the answer, as far as the second leg of the three-legged stool is concerned, is we're not actually better off in terms of media businesses. We are still reeling from the effect of the ABS-CBN shutdown. People are, media entrepreneurs or people who are in the media business are still looking for the right funding model or the right business model. And that's not good for journalism. But to get to the third leg, press, the journalism understood as the press, meaning it's an office of public trust. Are we better off as press 2 years into the Marcos presidency? Is there more press freedom?
In practice, there has not been. If you're looking at attacks, and threats against the media, we're not better off. We're still challenged. We're still facing the same problems. Yung libel cases naman, for example, they're not gonna end just because iba ni presidente. Yung policies of red tagging have not ended. It has siguro toned down a little bit. They're not doing it as blatantly, but it's still being felt in the regions. And we also are still struggling with trust from our audience. So that's one big challenge that we're facing. There have been attempts of reaching a younger audience, of reaching a busier audience. Pero we still have to work on trust. So, and that's partly government, pero that is a lot of that is on us as well, on how to earn back our audience's trust.
I can't help but think of the experience that I lived through during martial law. I was a reader at the time. I was in school, but I was reading. If you ask me, was there journalism under the dictatorship? The answer was yes. There was a lot of journalism. Some of it was quite good, but a lot of it was also self-censored, or in fact, censored by the government. So one of the most famous or infamous examples, for instance, is the headline of the Times Journal on September 1, in their September 1, 1983 issue, after the Ninoy Aquino funeral, which is the largest funeral in Philippine history and one of the largest in world history, millions of people turning out, was lightning kills one. In Zers 9 in Luneta. But somewhere in the story it says these people were injured and this person was killed because they were watching the funeral. No? So it was like inserted in there. So you can see the censorship and the self-censorship. But there was journalism. Were there successful media businesses? Yes. I mean, the 3 crony newspapers were doing very well and so on. But the third question, was there press freedom? The answer was no, because Marcos clamped down on our rights. And it had to take the so-called mosquito press to reclaim that space, right? So when you're talking about all these current threats now that we're facing, we haven't even talked about AI and disinformation and deepfakes and so on. I'm really worried that while it is something to celebrate, we have reclaimed some of the practices that were denied to us by the Duterte administration. So that's journalism as a set of practices. And while there's a big question mark about the ability of media organizations or media businesses to find the right business model in the wake of the ABS-CBN shutdown and other threats, that as far as press freedom is concerned, we have to fight for it all over again. All right, we have to reclaim that space all over again.
We do. It continues naman yan. Kaya nga, it's a little misleading din sometimes to say na press freedom was this way during, let's say, Duterte or under Aquino, ganyan. Kasi it would be helpful for us to look at a longer timeline nga na. It has always been challenged. It has always been, let's say, corporate interests have always been a factor in how we do coverage. political interests have always been a consideration in our coverage. So we have to continuously keep pushing back against those. Medyo pithy but it's true na of course again it's a reality na news in many areas is a business, so we do have to look at that aspect of it. But at the heart of it is journalism, no? So parang in some places you have to do a lot of light or fluff stories to be able to, kasi that's what finances, for example, yung serious journalism, no? So that's the challenge, I think, na it's not, parang yung ratio mo would not be so much fluff that you forget to do yung core of what we have to do, no? I think one good thing now is that for yung social media does help us in a sense na it can help remind us na, oy, why are you not covering this, ganyan, or if something is trending enough, then like dominant newsrooms will be forced to at least take a look na parang, what's this thing that's happening. So there is that sort of input also from the audience, versus before na, well, the news agenda was pretty much decided by news executives or news editors at their morning meeting in Historicon or whatever. Now there's an avenue for the audience, there's an avenue for the public to send their input more directly. Of course, we can't allow public clamor necessarily to always dictate how we parang we'll still go back to the principles, no?
There's a balance.
But we have learned kahit paano to listen to the audience as well.
Yeah, I think for all the hue and cry over social media, I think that is certainly one advantage we can get from it, right? It's another avenue for the public or the different audiences that we reach out to make their views known, right? In a way, something going viral, although of course there are structural considerations, is also a way for news managers to understand what the public or different audiences are interested in.
And there has been interaction as well with college students or with interns. It's a way then to bring not just new blood into the industry, but also new ideas. But why does this thing matter to, let's say, college students? And then, kaya pala. And
I was also struck. I found the 3S framework used in the first National Media Safety Summit to be very helpful as a way of framing the issues that journalism in the Philippines faces. So the 3 S's are sustainability, security, and safety. So maybe we can also borrow that framework. In terms of sustainability, how can we rely on journalism when for most journalists compensation is inadequate?
Again, very broadly lang. No? Well, kasi the idea there is that if your news company is doing well, then that should benefit your media workers as well. No? But in practice, sometimes it's not that way. For example, this was brought up during the safety summit. No? Now, how come a media company is making this much, but let's say your staff are getting this little, or your contributors are getting this little, no? And I think this is really a call. Medyo self-serving, I guess. This is really a call for workplace organizing. Kasi compensation can be raised, for example, by legislation or whatever. But even the DOLE says that the best way to improve compensation and other workplace issues is through conversation with management. And you can't do that na ako lang, kunyari, hey, I feel this is unfair, ganyan. It's a very, the employee's voice is stronger if you're together, no? So really it's workplace organizing. And
let's talk about that some more. What is it that the NUJP does? And Can you
Okay.
walk us through an example?
So yeah, for the longest time, we have been focused on press freedom issues, no, and we still are. So that's media safety, media security. But we've also noticed, no, na, and yeah, this has always been brought up, na parang we report, kunyari, the problems of society, but we don't mention issues, our own issues, no. So basically, the idea there is for NUJP chapters to be organized, no, and basically it's a venue for employees for media workers to discuss their issues. Usually yun nga, it's usually media repression, but there are issues too. Kunyari, if we're talking about story quotas, ganyan, maybe management is asking for too much, ganyan, and maybe there's a way for the employees to let management know in a more united way, ganyan. So, of course, the dream, I guess, or the long-term goal is for unions in newsrooms, no. But given then how Philippine society views unions, medyo mahirap yun. So we're starting with chapters. We're starting with basically getting employees talking to each other and discussing their.
I've had the benefit of working in a company for almost 20 years that was represented by a very able union. So I know its benefits, no? But anong sasabihin mo doon? Halimbawa, your management or any newsroom and any news management might say, actually magandang idea yan, pero ang hirap. Wala nga tayong sustainable business model tapos mag-iisip kayo ng union. How do we get management to the other side of the table?
I think long-running rin talaga yan, ano? It's been brought up in even in Media Nation events na parang we have to I think naman, no, most management in general are willing to listen or at least look out for their workers' benefit, no. Yeah, mahirap siya to win over, but we can't get there without starting, diba? In some newsrooms, hindi ka maganda yung ending nun. There have been instances where kunyari employees, hindi naman demands, no? Pero employees' issues have led to people just leaving. Okay? Pero yeah, it's a hard conversation, but it's something that we should start doing then.
The photojournalist from Cagayan de Oro, Bobby Lagsa, gave a really impassioned mini speech during the Safety Summit. I think that's impressed a lot of people. Essentially, he was saying the number of photojournalists in Mindanao is dwindling, and they're receiving a pittance for their work, and newsrooms in Manila are complicit in this institutional arrangement. No, what can be done to? I mean, I think we understand both sides of the equation, although it's really difficult to justify why let's say a Manila-based newsroom would pay like a few $100 for a really good photograph that was the product of hours of research and waiting and expertise. What can be done? I mean, that's such a. I think the reason partly why it made such a big impact in that safety summit was, it seems like a simple case of courtesy. You don't treat people that way. Parang ganyan. How do we think through this?
Medyo mahirap nga siya kasi may iba na ang argument there would be kesa sa wala, parang gano'n, 'di ba? Parang hanggang dito lang talaga yung budget, 'di ba? Ganyan. And so and I think I've heard it said din na parang so we need more revenue to be able to pay ganyan. Pero syempre, if you're the photojournalist or if you're the contributor, parang anong ko diyan, 'di ba? You're getting my services, you're getting my expertise, 'di ba? It's very stark nga actually if we're talking about Mindanao, no? Parang kung hindi na lang sila, and I think this is the fear, no? Parang and I think si Sir Froilan has said na parang hindi na siya mag-shoot kasi it's not worth it, parang ganon. So if no one takes photos, wala nang mangyayari, di ba? So it does show na ganun ka-importante yung photojournalists in Mindanao. No? If they stop doing it, wala nang kukuha.
So you're referring to Froilan Gallardo,
Yes.
who is now the president of the Cagayan de Oro Press Club. But going back to the issue of rates, no?
Right.
For photojournalists in Mindanao, for instance, would that be something that the NUJP, not necessarily by itself, maybe working with other organizations, can try to put together like a reasonable rate card or something?
Yeah. Actually, we did form yung Freelance Journalist Guild of the Philippines.
That's right. Yes.
And one of their, I think they are working on that, on a rate card to just agree na this is what we should be paid. Hindi ko alam kung how much they're asking for, no? Pero it's a good idea in the sense na this is what we're all agreeing we should be paid, no? And then syempre ang implied doon is if a news outlet isn't paying that much, then we're not going to do the work. I think ang challenge is there now is for them to get density kasi kunyari marami tayo who will say na we're taking this much, otherwise we're not going to do it. There's always the risk that someone will look for, let's say, a hungrier or a more desperate person to do it for less, no? So kailangan in agreement tayo na this is the rate.
Yeah. I hope we can really enforce that also.
But one problem also then is yung user-generated content.
That's right.
Let's say the photos that we get online from social media users. No? Ibang usapin pa nga kung if they should be paid.
That's right, yeah. That's the other side of the whole citizen journalism question. No? So in terms of sustainability, the first S of the 3S framework, are we better off today than
No, I think
8 years ago?
Across the world, newsrooms are in trouble naman. No? So parang... Although, I think in some companies, meron ng mga hina-hire back and there are some expansions. So that's good. But in general, I think, at least siguro sa online newsrooms, a lot of online reporters, a lot of online journalists are doing the work of siguro 3-4 people. And that's also partly because we still haven't figured out how to make money from online news. Ganyan, ano? Or baka you have. But in general, medyo mahirap siya. So, sustainable siya in the sense that yes, we can keep pushing out content. Pero in the long term, paano yun, diba? Like, your people are going to burn out, your people are going to leave. And we've seen that parang partly because of the political climate then. But yun din, a lot of people are burning out. A lot of people are moving out of journalism kasi nga, pera in the end.
So I don't know who to address this to, but maybe part of the, I'm not sure if it's a solution, but maybe part of the approach is to think, long term, and then make sure that there's enough, there's a critical mass of journalists, who have had experience reporting and so on, stay in journalism, and then you also have enough journalists who will stay for a long enough time, like a few years, to contribute. So in other words, I don't know, is it the HR organizations who will have to figure this out? But it has to be, I think, that kind of balance. You have to appeal to a certain kind of journalist who will stay no matter what. No? And they've developed the necessary expertise over the years. And then you also appeal to a certain idealistic graduate of a journalism course, for instance, who might stay for a few years before moving on to the much more lucrative field of PR. But in their few years, they are able to contribute a lot, and so on. So baka that kind of...
that could work. Pero the ideal is you can stay as long as you want, while you still want to. Diba? Pero hindi yung mapipilitan ka out of necessity na parang... Kasi okay naman. I mean, there's nothing wrong with leaving. Pero syempre, parang... As journalists, we feel that this is important work, and it's important that people do it. No?
As a former newsroom manager, I understand the reasons for leaving, but I feel really bad if they leave after like a year or so. Because you are just training the person, you're just giving them the
Yeah.
experience, right? No? Of course, they're writing stories, but they're not yet writing. I guess I would suppose they're not yet writing the best stories that they're capable
Right,
of. They're
right.
they're still learning the ropes and so on. But if you had given them a few more years, maybe if they had given themselves a few more years, doon ako parang nasasaktan niya. Parang, I understand you have to leave, no? And sometimes they're
Yeah.
offered twice, three times their salary. Pero parang sayang, it's an opportunity cost, a big one for journalism. Versus, okay, you have to leave. I can't expect you to stay for a long time. But if you're like 3 to 5 years, I think there's a lot of good stories that will come out of that.
Yeah, well, I think tama naman masaktan kasi it really does. Kasi ano yun you do develop a bond with a reporter, for example, if you work together, no? And yeah, sayang talaga. And siguro at the very least, what we can say is if kung kaalis talaga siya, then we did everything that we could for them to stay. And actually, okay yun na masasaktan. Kasi when I started out, the idea was maraming papalit sa'yo. Like there are hundreds of people lined up to take your job, no? So parang whatever, pwede ka naman palitan agad. And I think we're seeing that that's not the case anymore. A lot of people are not even considering a career in journalism anymore. So, yun. So that is really the call. And kaya rin we have events like the one we had last week na mag-uusap yung buong industry. But good point nga yun na we do have to bring the owners into that conversation. And medyo matagal tayo yung challenge. So.
Yeah, I remember one of the questions raised during the Investigative Journalism conference was this plaintive appeal. How do we get more young people, young graduates, to consider journalism as a career? I mean, they might be scared off by the previous demonization, the lack of money, that sort of thing. So that's always been asked in conferences like this, no? But it just hits you different when you hear it again.
But siguro maganda rin, and we have colleagues or colleagues pa rin naman who are showing the way na maybe you can do journalism not parang outside of a newsroom. Maybe you can do it on your own. Maybe you can but of course, maganda may grounding ka in formal journalism, I guess. But there are ways naman to still do journalism on your own. We've seen nga.
I don't know if I'm just mistaking this for a trend, but I think I'm seeing more young people try out the freelance route. No, and some of them are doing quite well. Like my former student and also former Inquirer colleague, Jesset. Who's doing very good work and getting good work as freelance. No, I think that's a sign of hope. I think for the industry. The second S in the 3S framework is security, which I understand to mean legal, political protection. How is Philippine journalism doing? Is it better off in terms of security?
Well, the threat of kunyari libel cases is still there. The threat of harassment kunyari is still there. No? Siguro there is some improvement in the sense that, for example, yung PT Foams has been acting naman. They've been acting on cases, which is better than yung previous dispensation, which was more focused on basically demonizing journalists. Pero yeah, kasi nga, it's the same system, it's the same rules, same policies that are in place. Yung for example, yung blocking of the websites of Buladlat and Pinoy Weekly has not been reversed. Pwede naman gawin ni Presidente yun, but it hasn't been. So we have to assume that maybe that works for them, diba? Yung mga ganon. So it is the same. Yun lang. Maganda lang siyang tingnan. Mas friendly nga, they're saying the right words. But yun nga, we have to look at action. Kunyari, sinabi ni Presidente na parang he prefers a critical press or something like that. Then let's see if that's true. Pero in the meantime, it is on us to continue to be critical nga, to see where that kung hanggang saan yun.
Related to the second S is the third S, which is safety, meaning physical security and so on. And is it safer now for Filipino journalists?
It's safer siguro in Metro Manila. Yeah, I think we can say it's safer in Metro Manila, but it has always been safer in Metro Manila. If you're covering outside, kahit nga as close as Cavite lang. Last month, meron tayong colleague, si Jose Santos. No? Kinuha yung equipment niya by security guards while he was covering a land dispute. So these things still happen. And this is not the first time na journalists who are covering land disputes are harassed or have their equipment taken. Ano? So, yeah, ganun pa rin. There is still that problem. Although, it does help, I think, na we're more aware of it. So, we're quicker to raise an alarm about it. Siguro, what we could improve then is the idea that journalism doesn't just happen in Metro Manila, no? Kasi we've seen, kunyari, if there's an attack or if there's a threat on a journalist in Metro Manila, medyo malakas yung outcry. But if it's a community journalist, but if it's an alternative media journalist, it's not as strong. It's not ganon. Parang the reaction is not. It's medyo a little muted. So siguro that's one of the challenges din for journalists in Manila, no? Parang to dalhin din natin dapat yung issues nila. Kasi nga meron namang basis for resentment. Kayo mga taga Manila ganyan. And we really do have to kasi if kung nahihirapan tayo sa Manila, what more yung nasa regions.
So overall, having used two frameworks, what are we looking at? You're saying that the metaphor that comes to my mind right now is that we're still in a sinking ship, but we got some breathing room. We are still at the risk of drowning, but we got some breathing room. Right? The president is saying the right things. He's made himself available, but only for short interviews, not in-depth ones, because as proven in that case in Australia, he doesn't do very well in a long niche interview, but he makes himself available. He gives these sound bites and so on. So there's some breathing room also in that we're not being demonized. Even the backing off on the idea of accrediting the bloggers and the vloggers, which has its pros and cons. I think I can also put that under the win column, right? I mean, it's like maybe they are rethinking because accreditation goes a long way. It gives you access and so on. So there are a few other things that we've reclaimed some of the practices that were denied to us, but the deeper reality is it's not ideal. We have for most media businesses, there's no real viable business model. We haven't even talked about the platforms, no? what they're doing to us. The frustrating fact that we have to depend on them. So all of that. I mean, can you attempt an overall picture? Or maybe another metaphor?
Siguro, I think going with your sinking ship, no? Ang kasabihan nga naman, di ba, parang the ship is sinking. Group yourselves into. So, I really think na we do have to continue to work together. Kasi it can start with, kunyari, campaigns for press freedom, ganyan. And supporting each other, which could kunyari, lead to the formation of, let's say, news cooperatives. But, we believe in the same things, ganyan. Why not try to put up something that we can work on together, mga ganyan. But in general, no, ang ano naman dyan is, we will always have to fall back on community. And we've seen naman na in the past attacks, there is a readiness within the community to work together. And I feel din na yung idea that we're doing better, the idea that, well, at least it's not Duterte, no? Yun nga, there is a risk of being complacent na rin na, ay, okay lang, hindi naman gano'n ka-grabe yung attacks. But yun, we have to keep in mind na hindi lang naman tayo yung media. Yun, na an attack on one is an attack on all. Medyo, again, another pithy thing to say, but totoo naman siya na we have to always be conscious then of what our colleagues are going through and support them in that. Basically, unity.
Yeah, and unity. Oh, I've heard that before. Complacency might be a problem, right? I mean, so we got some breathing room, and then people might think, okay, this is it, and we might be happy with what the little that was given to us. Maybe I can end by asking you about trust. Now, you've raised this before as one of the threats to press freedom, because it's undermining faith in the work that we do. And to be sure, we have to admit that we have had some practices that resulted in the loss of trust. I mean, I would say, for instance, focusing on horse races rather than what's really at stake in elections, for instance. That's not good for us down the road. No, the public, I think, will see through us. But I think we also have to recognize that we have lost trust because we have been targeted.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We've been demonized. Infamously, the Mocha Uson blog has a simple tagline, not a journalist. And the whole idea was, we're not like them.
Right.
How do we recover that trust? We are seeing there's less of the demonization, although red tagging continues. And that's very ironic because it's, as the International Crisis Group report of last month pointed out, the insurgency is really at its weakest point. And yet you have this group of government and military officials who continue to use red tagging as a weapon. So that's there. So there is still that kind of demonization, that smear campaign. But how do we recover the trust?
Okay. Of course, that the loss of trust, it can be attributed partly then to that demonization, but we also have to, and I think this is something that we've been doing for a while now. We do need to reflect on how we are doing things, and how we're connecting to our audiences. And to say, usually we focus on, let's say, corruption scandals, which are important, and we should keep doing that. But often, nagiging personalities or ganyan, no? Maybe it doesn't really resonate with our audience. No? Maybe they're more interested in, kunyari, crime or what. So basically, we have to also give the audience what they want, not in a bread and circuses way, no, but giving them, kunyari, usable information, the information that they need for their yung mga daily decisions nila, no? Which is probably not yung, kunyari, PDEA leaks, ganyan, which is important to cover, I suppose. Pero it's not as relevant to our audience. Ang ano ko dyan is maybe we should be covering from the ground more.
Okay.
And not, kunyari, sa Senate, ganyan. So yun, it's community stories pa rin, I feel. We need to tell people stories, hindi lang itong mga politiko na to. Ayun. Kasi otherwise, parang the audience might say, ano naman sa akin yan. So, there is that challenge to bridge yung na importante to kasi ganito. But also, parang importante itong issue na to. And it's, kasi for the longest time, I feel parang mga journalists are above the fray, ganyan, na parang we are objective naman, ganyan, and all that. Pero now, kunyari, yung problems with inflation, naramdaman din natin yan. Yung problems with commuting, with traffic. These are things that matter to us as well. So and these are things that matter to the people then. So we have to cover that. We have to, I guess, do more of that.
Sorry, one last, no? The issue of the problem of news avoidance was also raised, no? In the conferences. Like, there are more people who just don't want bad news. But whether we like it or not, sometimes we are in the business of bad news, right? We have to break stories about corruption, about wrongdoing, and so on. How do we square that with a significant portion of the public avoiding bad news?
Well, one way, again, taking cues from the community press, no, is to highlight how communities on their own deal with these kunyari issues. How do you one example would be kunyari nung lockdowns, like how did communities feed themselves on a community garden sila ganyan. So we could also highlight these successes ng mga tao without kasi parang often parang yung government aid or government program, which is important. Pero we could also look at parang how people are dealing with their lives. Yun.
I learned something from the editor-in-chief of the Philippine Daily Inquirer, which was her emphasis on the human face. Maybe we should go back to basics and focus on that, right?
Yeah, there have been, yun nga, there has been, it's probably something that we've always done, pero there has been a focus, more of a focus na rin on these so-called people stories, no? And yun nga, how do you make the news real to your audience? Parang ganyan. So, yeah. Relatability in the end. In some ways, it's being funny, being light, but sometimes yun din, parang basically saying, ito nga, oo nga, ito yung dinadanas natin together, and this is how this group of people is dealing with it, this is how this other group of people is dealing with it, rather than yung politics of it all, I feel.
And also, like what we're doing in Rappler, rethink journalism itself, right? So, create space, for instance, for different audiences to engage with you, to talk about particular stories, and maybe in that space, new stories and new forms of stories
I've seen that.
Can emerge, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Chair Jonathan de Santos of the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines. This has been an instructive, thoughtful, and necessary conversation. Again, many thanks.
Thank you. Good evening.
That's it for us tonight. The next step for engaged citizens, as always, is to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.